Hey everybody, happy Tunji Tuesday. I'm Gianna. I make videos every Tuesday. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. There's new content coming out all the time. I used to work in Walt Disney World and Storybook Circus. I've worked in Disneyland at Critter Country in New Orleans Square, and I've worked on the Disney Dream as a fairy godmother in training. So I've worked all around the Disney company. So today is a video that I have been kind of avoiding making, but now that we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of everything that went down when I left cruise line, I figured it was finally time to go ahead and make the video and be open and honest and tell you guys what's up. It's the story of how I got blacklisted from the Walt Disney Company. I don't know if blacklisted is actually a term that anybody else uses besides like me and my core group of friends, but what that means is basically I am no longer ever allowed to work for the Walt Disney Company or any affiliate companies, so ABC, ESPN, basically anything Disney owns. So everybody's like, oh my God, Gianna, what did you do? Like, what is going on? Well, let me walk you through it. So flashback to a year ago, literally this time, it's like the end of January, beginning of February, and I am like dying on Disney Cruise Line. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I will link the video of why I quit down below so you can go ahead and watch that. It's kind of like a pre-video to this one because I think that kind of will walk you into what's happening in this video. Because if you don't know like the struggles that I went through on Disney Cruise Line, and if you don't know like all about that, I don't think that you're gonna understand this video as well. So if you haven't watched that video, go ahead and watch it. Basically, I was having a really tough time on cruise line. My foot was broken, not that I knew at the time. I was like in a lot of pain. I was not feeling my best. Mentally, physically, spiritually, in every sense of the word, I was like the hottest mess. And this happens to a lot of people on cruise line. And I'm not saying that a lot of people don't love it, because I know a lot of people do love it. And I know people are gonna come for me being like, but people love cruise line. Our servers loved it. Okay, if that's what they said to you, then that's fine. Then they loved it. But for me and a lot of the girls that I talk to that have also done cruise line, not the case. So anyway, here we go. Things started to get like really bad for me, and I was extremely unhappy at where I was, and I kept thinking to myself, like, if I'm so unhappy, why don't I just leave? Like, why don't I just make the decision for myself? Like, why don't I just say, it's time, this is it, here we go, bye. And it was something that I had wanted for so long, and cruise line was something like so near and dear to my heart. And no matter how much research you do, no matter how much you think you know what the job is going to entail, I could literally sit here and tell you exactly what the job entails, and you would still go and think like it was gonna be something different. Like, you can't prepare yourself for the type of lifestyle of a cruise ship because it's unlike literally anything else you could ever possibly do, because you're living where you work and you're working where you live and you're with the same people. You're like on a floating vessel in the middle of the ocean. It's literally unlike anything else. And people compare it to other jobs working 70 hours a week, but it's not like that, because other jobs you get to go home, you get to drive a car, you get to breathe fresh air, you get to be around new people. You don't get that when you live on a cruise ship. I'm going off on a little bit of a rant. I digress. Things were getting bad, as you can see in my last video, and I was ready to quit. It was like time to get off. So my contract was 6 months, and I was 4.5 months into my contract. And I was really close to finishing. I decided to put my 30 days in because on cruise line, it's a 30-day notice, not a 2-week notice like most other jobs. So I put in my 30 days, and my managers and everything were spectacular. They were great, so nice to me. But they were basically like, here are the hard facts. Like, you have like so little time left. And if you put in your 30 days, you're on a 6-month restricted rehire. What a restricted rehire is that for 6 months, the Walt Disney Company cannot hire you. So I would have been a restricted rehire for 6 months after my 30 days. And I was like, you know what, it's fine. I literally don't care. Even though my plan after cruise line was to settle in Florida and start working for the company, because I love the company, I just literally couldn't do it on cruise line. And I was sacrificing everything, like literally everything, my physical, my mental health, and it wasn't worth it to me. And I'm not saying that the job was bad. Again, I'm going off on a tangent, but people are always saying like, oh, the job couldn't have been that hard. And it's not that the job is hard, and it's not that the job is bad. It was the best job I've ever had. But because they're pushing you so hard and you're working 70 plus, usually 80 hours a week, and you don't get any like off time because you're always on, that's the part that's hard. I decided to put in my 30 days. It just wasn't working for me. And even getting to that point was a really, really, really hard decision for me, because when I first got on the ship, I was saying like, oh, I can't wait for my next contract. I can't wait for my third contract. Oh, I hope that my next contract I get on a different ship. I hope that next contract I can do the Mediterranean. I was making plans to stay on the ship. Like, this was what I thought was going to be my career for like a while. So it was hard for me to make the decision, but I ultimately decided in the end that my health and my sanity mattered more to me than what I was doing on the cruise ship. So they were trying to tell me that I had such a short time to go and I could push through. And they even printed me out like a little pie chart of like how far I had gone and how far I had left to go. And I did take a few days to think on it after I talked to my managers, but I decided in the end that 30 days was what was gonna have to happen because I couldn't push myself anymore. And the thought of having to push myself was killing me. I just like would lay in bed at night and think like, oh my God, I can't. And I think like the negative thinking is what actually ended up damning me in the end, but there was nothing I could do. I was going down with the ship like either way. It was bad. So I put in my 30 days and I'm working and I'm doing my thing and I'm miserable and I'm sad and I'm depressed and I'm everything you can think. And it was like, I remember those like few days as like a reel in my head. Wake up, go to work, go to sleep, wake up, go to work, go to sleep. And you have a 1 hour break for lunch and a 1 hour break for dinner, and you literally like eat as fast as you can and like run back to the room and fall asleep. And towards the end, I know I've mentioned this in plenty of other videos, but towards the end I was literally just like eating peanuts in my room because I didn't want to waste time going to the mess because all I wanted to do was sleep, because you get no sleep because you're working so much. And it was like Groundhog Day and you like wake up and it's almost like a joke and you're like, where am I? Like, what is going on? 5 days had passed after I put in my 30 days and I was like, I can't do this anymore. It was a Thursday night and I knew the next day was a port day. I knew I would be able to get off the ship and I was like, I need to get off the ship tomorrow. And that's another hard thing about cruise line is you feel very trapped, because I couldn't have just walked off the ship on Friday and left. Like in any other job setting, if you're at work and you're like, wow, I want to die, I'm going to leave, you can literally get up and leave. You can't do that on a ship because you're in the middle of the ocean. There's protocol for everything, and because you're in a ship in the middle of the ocean, like the Coast Guard gets involved, so you can't ever just like leave. You have to tell people if you're gonna go. So 5 days go by after the 30 days and I was like, I'm getting off. I gotta go. I have to be off on Friday, like I have to. So I went down to the managers early in the morning on Thursday and I was like, hey, like I'm done. I can't do it and I need to get off like tomorrow. And they were like, go work your shift today. Like, see how you feel after you work. Like, you know, everybody, they kept saying like everybody in their first contract feels like this, but then they get over it and they keep coming back and they keep coming back and they keep coming back. And they used my trainer as an example and they were like, she wanted to go home during her first contract and she hated it. Now she's on her like 7th contract. And I'm like, I don't want that for myself. I was like in such a panic. What I know now is a panic attack, but happening like continuously for days at a time. I don't want to sound dramatic, but it was like literally traumatizing. I just wanted to get off so bad. And I remember thinking like, there's no other option. I committed to the thought. And then I was like, I need to go. But there's so much you have to do in the process to get off and go. I didn't know if I was going to make it by the next morning. So that was stressing me out. Finally, like I sat down with my manager and he was like, okay, so if you leave tomorrow, you can never work for the Walt Disney Company ever again. And you can never work for any affiliate companies ever again for the rest of your life. And I was like, okay. Like I literally did not, that's how you know how like sick in the head I was. I didn't even care. And this is like the only thing I've cared about my whole life. And then he said that to me, which should have been like, oh my God, I have to stay. And I was literally even more convinced that I needed to go. Because to have a life sentence for something, I don't know. I don't agree with it, but I'll continue on with the story. I was like, that's fine. Like, I just want to get off the ship. I can't do it anymore. I need to go. So they were like, okay, well, if that's what you want, you need to write a written statement and like leave it in my, so I wrote a written statement. I left it in the office. I had to do so many things, like checklists of like all different kinds of stuff I don't even remember, but I remember I had to pack everything up and I had to make sure everything was done because the crew office like closed at a certain time. So I had to make sure like I got my last payment and I got my last this and that and the other thing. I had to hand in obviously my blue ID, everything, and be ready to leave in the morning. So it was like just a crazy night because I was running around. There was like so much crying. Everybody was sad. I was sad. I wasn't sad that I was leaving. I was just sad to leave like my friends, you know, and know that I wouldn't see them for a really long time, especially because they're from all over the world. So it's not like I could just be like, hey, come to Florida. I made the decision. I made the choice and I got off the ship. It was still to this day probably the best decision I've ever made in my life. I truly think that if I stayed on the ship, I would have like brought some type of harm onto myself. It did. Like it did bring harm onto me, but I think it would have brought worse harm onto me. Like 2 weeks after I had gotten off the ship, I went to the podiatrist, got an x-ray of my left foot, found out that the like long bone under my pinky toe, that like one that runs up the side of your foot, I still don't know what it's called. I said this in my last video too, but it was broken. And it was in the process of being healed because it had just been like that the whole time. And I was like, oh my God, this is awful. But also like, there is the point that I've been trying to prove the whole time. So I'm like, maybe I could call Global HR and like send them in my x-rays to be like, listen, this is why I had to leave. Because if you go through medical or if you go through a route like that to get off the ship and be like, you know, my foot is broken, I need to be signed off, you don't get blacklisted. But because I was in pain and I didn't go through medical, I got blacklisted. So I was thinking like maybe if I call HR and I tell them, and they basically were like, it doesn't matter, like you're done for. So I was like, okay, well that was my last attempt. Fast forward again to September. So I got off the ship in February. So fast forward to September. I'm feeling much better in my life. I'm happier, I'm healthier, I'm doing good. And I go back to the dream to sail as a guest. So as I'm sailing as a guest, I see all my friends and I see my manager and everybody and I'm saying hi to everyone, and me and my manager were talking late one night and he was like, why don't you just like apply like for Disney? I'm sure they've forgotten. And I was like, oh my God, like these people on the ship are so disconnected from what happens in the parks, like they have no idea. There's like a database. People, you know, if you're like, you know, if you're blacklisted, Disney knows. They don't just like, I don't know, whatever. So on a whim, when I got home, I just like decided to apply for whatever job they were hiring for, like housekeeping or something, just to see what would happen. And I immediately got a no longer in consideration email. So it is real and it is true. I can never work for the Walt Disney Company again in my life. And I don't know, I never really felt sad about it. You'd think that I would have felt sad about it at some point, but I don't feel sad about it. It's just like interesting to me, like other people I know who have gotten fired from the company who like now work for it and like the things that they did compared to what I did. And it's just like, you feel like you get away with a lot more in the parks. I get it. I get it's contractual. I get I broke a contract, but like, I started listening to this podcast a few weeks ago. Love the podcast, it's great. And it's affiliated with ABC, which is a Disney company. And the guy whose podcast it is, on the first episode I was ever listening to, the woman says something about swearing and he's like, oh yeah, I can't swear. And she's like, oh I forgot, it's cause you're under Disney. And so I was like Googling this guy. He's an ABC anchor. So I'm like still listening to his podcast, and in one of his podcasts he says like, he's like famous for having a panic attack on air while he was anchoring for ABC. And this was a few years ago. He mentions about how like the panic attack was like induced by not only like unhealthy like mental health state, but like cocaine. And I'm like, okay, so you can be on an ABC endorsed podcast talking about how you did cocaine before you went on air for an ABC show, and they're still like, yeah, we'll like fund you for podcasts and stuff. And it's just like, I had a broken foot and I quit my job. I don't know. I just think it's like wild, but I know like cruise line is way different than the parks and it's way more strict and it's way more serious. So again, I get it. I just don't necessarily agree with it. That is the story of how I got blacklisted from the Walt Disney Company. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. If you liked this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching my Teen G Tuesday videos. I really appreciate it, and I love putting them out for you because I love sitting in front of a camera and talking about myself. So, happy Teen G Tuesday, everybody. Bye.